Riverside.
Welcome to Dance Talk with Joanne Carey, where the dance world connects, the conversations inspire, and where we are keeping them real. I'm your host, Joanne Carey, and today I am joined with Román Baca. He is the artistic director of the Exit12 Dance Company. He was a Marine. He served our country, so I thank him for his service. And amongst other things, he has done so much in the dance community, as well as with veterans, which we're going to get into all that. So I want to welcome Román to Dance Talk. Thank you for joining me today, Román.
Joanne, thank you. It's a joy to be here, and I love your podcast. I hope people listen to more episodes than just this one.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you will have to spread the word for me. You can be my walking advertisement.
Sounds good.
Well, yeah. So again, Román, I'm just really happy that you're here with me today. I have to also give a shout out to Gabriel because he had put us in touch. So I really thank him for putting us in touch. For those of you listening, Gabriel is a friend of mine. He's a friend of Román's. He dances with Román on occasion, and I'm just happy that he connected us. He highly recommended you. He thought you would be such a great guest for my listeners. So I'm really grateful to him for that. But I just want you to take a moment, if you would, and introduce yourself to the listeners and give our listeners a little background about who you are, how you started in dance, and how you got to where you are today.
My name is Román Baca. I grew up in New Mexico and then moved to the Pacific Northwest in my later high school years. In high school, I had a friend who was a ballerina, and I loved the stories that she would tell me about the studio, about performing. She choreographed one of the high school's productions, and so watching that whole process was really interesting. So I decided to give it a try. I started in jazz and hip hop and a little bit of ballet when I began. Ended up doing some regional musicals when I moved back to New Mexico, which solidified my love for the art form. And then I gravitated away from all of the other forms and focused specifically on ballet. So I moved to the East Coast, studied more professionally, and ended up working as a professional ballet dancer for a couple of years before I stepped away to join the United States Marine Corps in 2000.
Wow. I mean, that when I was reading your background and listening to some of the things you've done, ballet and military, that is like two different worlds. But again, as we'll get into later, I liked how you talked about, military drills and military operations as choreography. So I liked that correlation that you made. However, one thinks of the military. I'm just going to dive right into the military piece here, if you don't mind. But, and again, because it's near and dear to my heart, like I shared to you off camera, my husband was a Marine. My father was in the Navy, I have a lot of military background. So my ears perk up when I hear somebody who served our country, whether in peacetime or in war. So I just want to ask you, those two different worlds, and then to have those two worlds collide, when one thinks of the military, you think of these, the strong soldier outside, that force, and war. You think of war, whether there's peacetime, where there's no war happening, and especially where we are today in the world, there's so much unrest and war going on around us. So those images juxtaposed against the lightness and airiness and beauty and gentleness that we come to know and love about ballet. How does a ballet dancer become, of all things, a Marine? Tell me this.
I think, you talked with some of your guests about this, about the misconceptions of being a male dancer today. So when I was growing up, there certainly was a lot of bullying towards myself and my fellow classmates and fellow professional male dancers. And so there were a couple of factors, in my decision. One, I got burnt out on performing the same ballets all of the time. Um, I wanted to do something different. And I looked at, like you mentioned, my family's background in the military, and it was a strong one. My father served in the Korean War. Several of my uncles served in the other branches for years. And so along the lines of like hearing stories of ballet and wanting to do that, I leaned on the stories that my family shared of the military service and decided that the Marine Corps was going to be challenging. It was not only going to challenge me physically and mentally, but it was going to challenge others' perceptions of who I was. As you shared, these two very different worlds, and transitioning from one into the other, seeing if I could succeed in such a drastically different world.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely a different Marine. I remember sharing some photos of me dancing in boot camp when that initial military training started. To first, my fellow platoon mates, like three of them were peering over my shoulder, and two of them thought it was really cool. One of them never talked to me again. I used to say that I thought that was because of the ballet world. It could have been anything, but I chalked it up
Oh,
to the fact
sure.
that I was a ballet dancer. And so then when I graduated boot camp, I ended up telling my senior drill instructor at the end of boot camp that he had trained a ballet dancer into becoming Marine. And he mentioned there was something weird about me the whole time, but I wanted him to know, who he had transformed into
Yeah.
this soldier, into this Marine.
Mm-hmm.
I think what was interesting is that I think then I found out I wanted my service and my performance to lead before my history. And so
Yes.
I didn't really tell anybody after that I was a ballet dancer, and wanted to
Wow.
prove that I could, perform and serve in uniform um, honorably
Yeah.
and well. And it was put to the test when my unit was sent to Fallujah, Iraq during the Iraq
Mm-hmm.
War in 2005. Um,
Mm-hmm.
our our primary job was to patrol the local villages in Humvees loaded with machine guns, looking for insurgents. And so, we would spend the days with vehicles loaded to the teeth, um, trying to be as violent and aggressive as we could in the combat zone, so that A, no one would want to mess with us. Two, if they did want to mess with us, maybe their bravado would be decreased by a little bit, and we could gain the
Mm-hmm.
advantage. Um, but with all of that going on, I think the artistic pull and the artistic thing inside of me needed to be nurtured even in Iraq. And so in the
Yeah.
early mornings, I would wake up, I would climb to the top of our where we were staying, and I would pull out a sketchbook and some pencils, and I would sketch until I had to go on patrol.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And a couple of things, it brings to mind for me. First of all, for those listening too, my husband doesn't share a lot about his time in the Marines. He doesn't share, but I also think that's part what I've come to understand and respect is that that's I think part of it. There's something about the military, but I'm going to speak specifically about the Marines because my father was Navy and that was different. You know, there's something about the Marine brotherhood that to me is just extraordinary. When I see it, when I see two Marines, because I've witnessed my husband do this, you cannot know another Marine, but the minute you find out that you were each in the military and that you each served in the Marines, there's something that happens. I stand back in awe because it's something you have to witness that exchange between two Marines that brings me to my knees all the time. It gives me goosebumps as I'm telling you. It is so powerful that that connection And that, I think that love, honor, Marines, right? That it's powerful. So thank you, no matter how much and how often, I usually don't get political on my podcast, but how often, people can look down upon the military. They shouldn't, because you are the men and women who are protecting us from God knows what. So I just say that. That's the one thing I have to say. But to be, you saw active combat, you saw active war, and I can only imagine having to go into that space to heal from that, to keep your innards from crumbling. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's a nice lead into some of the work that you do with veterans. Can you lead into that?
Absolutely. The training was hard enough as a member of the military, but when we got to Fallujah, I think things got harder, and also making sense of the things that happened got a lot harder. As I shared, our job was to patrol the local villages, and so for the first few months that we were there, we rode out like it was the Wild West, ready to engage in gunfights around every corner, being very suspicious of anyone we came upon. We had a very aggressive set of rules of engagement so that we would, again, deter attacks. But what we found out is that, we were working in some very small, remote villages, and we weren't making very much headway. And I had some brilliant leadership that decided to transform our mission a bit and start to do more humanitarian type work. And so we started going into the villages and going to the schools and handing out school supplies that people would send us from home. We started interacting with the children that used to chase our trucks a little bit more. We tried to hand out food and water whenever we could. And then one of the best missions we've ever been on was trying to develop a line of communication between the villages and the base, so that if they saw something was going wrong or that they anticipated attacks or whatever, they could let us know so that we could respond. Again, small drop in a big ocean of, like you said, politics and, things that were well above my pay grade. However, we tried. We and my men were in danger every day from rocket attacks, small arm attacks, indirect fire, and all of those experiences take a toll. Yeah. And, the experience of being away from home for so long, the training, the service, the day and day danger, and then trying to come home and, one, make sense of it all, and two, decide what to do next. And, I struggled with that. A lot of, not only my Marines struggled with that, but fellow service members from other services, from other countries even, struggled with that in a large way. And so, I, again, looked to my grandfather's example as to see what I would do post-service. It's very much like that I'm leaving dance kind of decision-making process of like, this was my identity and a big part of my life for so long. What am I going to do next? That first transition for me was the military. And now I had another transition. I was going from the military to what? Like, what does a person do after war? There's not a book. There's not a manual. And so, my grandfather, after the Korean War, settled down with my grandmother, bought the house that they lived in until they passed, and became a postman and lived a very rich life, had tons of kids. And I was like, that's what somebody's supposed to do. That's what I'm going to try to do. And so did the same thing, got like a corporate job, bought a condo with my combat pay, tried to make a go of it with somebody I cared about, and did that for a little bit until my girlfriend, who's now my wife, sat me down and said, "You're not the person I knew before the war. The person I knew before the war was this artist who was happy-go-lucky, full of life, like loved art, and now you're angry, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're mean, and you're making people afraid of you.
Wow.
And she said,
That took
and
courage for her to tell you that. I'm sorry I'm
tons of it,
interrupting you,
right?
but that took a lot of courage to say that. Yeah.
Tons of it. And
Yay,
and here
life.
here I am on the other side thinking, okay, like she's gonna basically turn and walk out the door. And then
Mhm.
what am I gonna do? And instead, you talk about courage, she said, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And throughout my ballet career, I had had opportunities to choreograph. And when I started more professional training, I actually told people that I was there to learn how to be a choreographer, not to be a dancer. I ended up being a dancer, not a choreographer. But I told her I would start a dance company. And without skipping a beat, she
Wow.
said, let's do it. And so we started in New York City, rented a studio, the smallest studio at Steps on Broadway, on 72nd Street, and just started putting together steps, to music. And hold
Mhm.
on, I'm gonna pause for just a second
Yeah.
because it says reconnecting, and I want to make sure it's still recording.
Yeah.
I guess if you can still hear me, it's still recording.
Yes, no,
Okay.
no problem. Yeah, it's whenever the weather is bad like this, sometimes, and listeners, you're going to hear me saying this. Yeah, I can still hear you, which is fine. Yep,
Cool.
and it'll correct itself too, and the listeners will hear me saying that, but that's okay because this is we're recording.
Yeah, it's live. Thanks for bearing with us, listeners. Yeah, and we started putting stuff together, and
Yeah.
it wasn't focused on the military. It wasn't focused on anything more than just getting. For me, it was getting in the studio and trying out some stuff. And for her and for those around me who cared about me, it was like, let's get this guy thinking
Hmm.
about something different, doing something different, and maybe through art he can heal and he can reconnect with those around him in meaningful ways.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah,
that
and
was
I like
how.
that you say that because so often. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I'm losing. I'm losing you just a little bit. I think we're if we just hold on for 1 second because the connection's a little funny thanks to the weather. Whenever the weather is crazy like this, it makes the connection funny. Can you hear me? You can hear me, good.
Yes, I
So
can
I'm
hear
sorry.
you.
Just repeat what you were saying. You were talking about the those around you. Yeah. Good, good. Yeah.
So, she thought that going
So
back to
continue what you were
dance
saying.
she thought that going back to dance would be a great way to both heal personally and reconnect with those around me in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah, which is so powerful. And I had started to say that that's what I love about dance. And I'm finding I knew that was true for me that art, dance specifically, really has that healing capability, whether you think you need it or not. It really does. And that's why, audiences go to see art. They're going to seek something. They're going to look at something. They want to be moved. They want to be stirred. They want to come away different than when they entered that theater. I hear that so many times from the different people I have on my podcast, the artists, whether it's a choreographer, whether it's a dancer, whether it's a lighting person, whether it's a composer, we all talk about the same thing. And that's the gift of artistry. That's the gift of artists. And that's why we're given the gifts that we are to speak to other human beings through our artistry. Tell us how you're doing that through your Exit12 Dance Company. And by the way, I love the title because tell me about the title, Exit12.
So, as I mentioned, we started at Steps on Broadway, which is on 72nd Street. When we were trying to think of the name, of course, I suggested, Román Baca Dance Company, because why wouldn't you name it something like that? Because that's what you're creating. But the people around me and the people who cared about me said, no, let's make this something bigger. And they suggested one of our dancers and co-founders would take Exit 12 off the FDR to get to Steps because she drove in. And so we were like, well, why don't we name it this? Because one, it's a throwback to how we started. And two, it leaves us room to make it mean something. And it really has. Just at a show
Yeah.
last year, a fellow Marine walked up to us and he said, Exit 12, does that mean like you've had people watching your back and you've been watching their six for so long that now it's time to move on. It's time to take that 12 o'clock exit out of like this hard space. And I was like, yeah, let's move it there. Let's give it meaning. So that's how we started. You know,
That's amazing. Yeah.
and in New York City, it didn't take too long before like I felt this draw to start telling stories about the experiences that I had in Iraq, and to start, like you said, I think you said it brilliantly when you said, your husband doesn't really talk about his military experience, and my grandfather did the same thing, as did my uncles. Like you wouldn't ask about it, they wouldn't tell you about it. It was just the way things were. And seeing all the things that happened in Iraq, and then seeing what the media
Mm-hmm.
at the time in 2008 was putting on the televisions to describe the experience I had been through, I was like, that's not the Iraq we experienced. And it's different, it's nuanced, and there's more people to talk about than just the warfighters that go out as, and the media portrays them as these heartless killing robots, and then, these insurgents that are just bloodthirsty, and no nuance and no space for the different lives that serve and the different lives that are impacted by war. And so
Yeah.
we started telling stories of the
Yeah.
war on stage here in New York City. So if you can imagine going into, one of the showcases that they had at the time, and you go into the dressing room and there's a whole bunch of dancers putting on, tights and dance clothes and dance shoes. And here's like two Marines putting on camis and boots because they're going to do like a dance that kind of depicts what it was like in Iraq.
Yeah.
And that's the first work
Yeah.
that we produced back in 2008.
Which again, I find it really interesting. And, a couple things with the Exit 12. I like, when I first heard that it was Exit 12, I was like, oh, are we getting on the exit or are we getting off the exit? Like that was the image I had. Are we traveling to or going from? Which I think is great, and again, back to, speaking about, the military itself is, I think too, these past years and these past generations, after, this is my own thought process as you were talking, after World War II, where the military was looked so differently in that generation of military, because they were looked as heroes. I mean, and we still do. We call military heroes, but the temperature at home became so different towards the military.
Yes.
That they look, like you said, shown in the media and what's happening. So I think it almost makes a military person, especially who's seen active combat, withdraw even more. It's bad enough, first of all, you've experienced what you've experienced and seen what you've seen, but then to have to withdraw from it because you're not welcome with open arms.
Yes.
So that has to change, I think. Not that I'm spearheading a movement of change. However, we are talking about it. And I think it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And I watched on your website, and you also sent me the link to it. But there was a really powerful, I think the documentary, I thought it was so powerful. It was the woman, I can't think of her name right now, so I apologize. But she choreographed it. She talked about her two sons left for, and she choreographed waiting at home for them. And that was and the fact that it was done on film was even, I thought, more, the dancer who danced it, I thought, was spectacular in the way she related to film, dance on film, that's a whole thing, right? And then the way it was portrayed, I thought it was so powerful. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, I recommend you watching it, because it's very powerful to have a mother, waiting for not just one son or daughter, but for her, it was her two sons, to come home, to come home. and what that was like for her and what her sleepless nights were like. And then just going through the room, it was like those nightmares. This is how I interpret it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
nightmares of going through the rooms and just being up all night, that worry, you know, so it was really quite powerful without being, it wasn't about, it wasn't a political statement. It was her experience.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is so beautiful about the work you're doing. It's putting to light experiences that veterans and military are having, and they can heal through dance. Talk about that and talk about some of this training you've had, because are you currently a PhD? I'm reading it because I thought this was really interesting. You're a PhD candidate. Are you still a candidate, or do you have your PhD?
I'll have my PhD in 2026.
Excellent. I'm going to congratulate you early. And I love what I took the quote right off of your bio. It says, investigating the military human through the arts. Tell me about that. Talk to me about that. Is that your thesis?
So much to unpack. My thesis is more looking at a performing arts practice as a way to positively impact both health and well-being and hope in military veterans. And we can talk about that. I think I want to go back to what you were talking about the sentiment about the military in the U.S. I think veterans today have a lot to thank Vietnam veterans for, because Vietnam veterans were treated horribly upon return. And because of that, they made it their mission to make sure that post 9/11 veterans in particular were treated with respect and were treated with honor when they returned. And, you know, these gentlemen and ladies that served in uniform in a conflict overseas were some of the first veterans that we talked to as we started investigating how we were going to bring these things to stage. They were brave enough to share their stories. They were brave enough to talk with us and give us their input. And they gave us a lot of lessons to carry forward. I think, you know, when we look at dance and telling stories through dance, you talked about Angela. So the next step in Exit12's journey was to step away from just my stories, because they were from one perspective, one person that saw an experience in one way. And we soon discovered that we needed to bring more voices in and tell more stories. And so Angela's story is one of those where, you know, for the documentary, Exit12 Moved by War, which is, if you Google that, it's free on Vimeo to watch. We envisioned Exit12 stage dances in film. So the conflicted, the first one with the military members and the women in a rocky garb on a subway. That's a dance we perform in our repertoire. Angela is the mother of two Army sons who wanted to create a dance about exactly what you said. Thinking about her sons growing up, doing all the things that boys growing up do, getting into fights, falling in love with their first loves, and then joining the military and getting deployed to Afghanistan together. And then waiting and waiting and waiting for them to come home. It was a very important story for us to tell. It was a very important story for us to put on stage that people resonate with. And it was even more richly underpinned by the score to the stage production, which was done by her brother, who was a Marine in the Marine band, who wanted to compose the score so that each musical phrase and each musical section never resolved, never had a musical resolution. So the audience is always just waiting for that next thing or for that resolution. And it causes that same anxiety that Angela had waiting for her sons.
Wow, that's very powerful.
And as you said, all of this work as we move forward, you know, it just grew and evolved. And then, you know, when we started telling more stories, we realized that we also needed to challenge the perception that people have of a military veteran. Like I said, you know, people think we're these brainless robots that are trained to kill. We just go out there, doot, 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 and fire a gun. And And we're so nuanced in every walk of life, every person from every demographic and every socioeconomic section of society joins and serves. And we wanted to be a place where we could tell stories of these individuals and kind of peel back the uniform and show the human. And so we started inviting veterans into our dance studio and creating works alongside them, with them, and having them in our pieces and our productions. And so we now, when we do a show, our fully realized production is an 8-week workshop with the military community. So active, former serving members of the military, their family members, and civilian supporters come in. They go through our 8-week workshop. We together choreograph a piece. We add a soundscape to that piece that is a combination of music and also voices from the community, in terms of poetry, spoken word, or just quotes or phrases. And we put that on stage for people to see the military in a different light and military veterans in a different light. And then we kind of bookend that with other Exit 12 repertoire, like Angela's piece, our pieces about Iraq. We started a collaboration with CreatiVets, which is a organization out of Nashville that pairs singer-songwriters with veterans. They create a song based on the veterans' experience. We've been putting dances to those songs and putting those on stage, all aimed at 3 things. One, healing the military community. We want to aid in their healing. We want to aid in boosting their physical and mental health. 2, educating people about the impact of war on people, not just on the military, but on people that live in the countries, on the families that are left at home. And then 3, advocating for veterans. As you know, military suicide is a huge epidemic. Veteran mental health is in a state of constant decline. And so through our work, we aim to advocate for programs like ours, other programs that do nothing but advocate for health and well-being and lives of the military community.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's just really wonderful and so clear. Like the mission is so clear. When you do the performances, do you schedule performances around, a holiday, like a military, like say a Memorial Day or anything like that coming up? Or is it just when you schedule them on your calendar? Do you try to have them coincide with anything like that?
For years, we deal with the military, so we have to have a performance on Memorial Day. We have to have a performance on Veterans Day. And to tell you the truth, we still aim for those dates, but we try to push them like a week after or a week before, just because there's so much that happens in the military community on those specific days. That we could, like, to give you an example, we just did a performance on the Intrepid Museum, which is the aircraft carrier in New York City Harbor. We transformed it into a stage of healing and art. And we did it the week of Memorial Day, but on the Friday after Memorial Day. And it tended to work incredibly well, to give people space to both honor Memorial Day in traditional ways that they would honor Memorial Day, and then to come and partake in our performance in Memorial, in a real way, given just a couple days of space.
And to do that, Intrepid, first of all, I went with my dad to the Intrepid when my dad was alive. He and I went to the Intrepid Museum, and because he was Navy, and my father, was so proud of his service in the Navy. And so I grew up with that. I grew up with the respect for somebody in the military. And so when I also read that about you doing that on the Intrepid, I just thought that's incredible. I just think that, will you do that again, or you don't know yet? Because I'm excited for that to happen.
We started, in 2011, I visited the Intrepid for the first time. And as artists do, you have a vision. And I had this vision of a dance concert on the deck of the Intrepid at sunset. And so
Yeah.
we've been developing a relationship with the Intrepid till then, and doing small performances in conjunction with or alongside, and last year was our first major partnership with them,
That's great.
because the Intrepid's mission is basically centered around transforming this massive weapon of war into a place of culture and community.
Yes,
And so they have, and peace, and they have tons of educational programs. They work with countless school children, community groups, veterans organizations. And so when we saw the alignment between what we're doing, transforming the veteran experience into art and healing, and we saw them transforming a weapon of war into art and healing, we're like, this makes sense. So we partnered with them for our first time last year, and we're continuing the partnership
That's wonderful.
for years to come. So around Memorial Day, look for the date. We'll be on the deck again.
That's awesome. I love that. How about, I'm going to throw this out there because you never know who's listening. I have big hopes. How about the White House? Or
funny you should say that.
do tell. I'm coming.
We have a great partner in Washington, D.C. called ASAP, Armed Services Arts Partnership. And they started doing comedy with veterans. They would bring veterans in, run a comedy course, and then they would put them on stage and have them do like this veteran stand-up night. I volunteered for them when they did the Gotham Comedy Club here in New York City, and became friends. And we've done workshops with them and partnered with them. They invited us to the White House earlier this year, I think in March or April, where we went and attended. It was right around Women in the Military Appreciation Month or Day. And so they had a cadre of military women that got up on stage, did comedy, spoken word. Exit12 was mentioned at the White House. And so we are looking forward to a partnership with them, a bigger partnership, doing something in DC, probably next spring or fall, depending on, we're still waiting to hear, but we're actively working on it.
That's exciting. Because I think the work is so powerful, and it's powerful because I think I've listened to the interviews, and I've watched, the clips that you provide on your website, and it's so moving to watch, how you approach the classes or when you're working on a piece, and to hear the veterans speak about their experience and how dance has doing this with you has helped them. And I say that again because we're, as dancers, we always say how dance really touches you. It just it opens up something inside of you. It reaches so far down, and it gets everything that's in there out. If you can access it, and the music, of course, the music does that too. It's so in conjunction, and when you talked about, I don't remember if it was in the documentary or when you were rehearsing or you were just being interviewed, but you had talked about, and I mentioned it earlier, about when you learn, drills in the military, you realize that it was like choreography, because they're so specific. Can you talk a little bit about that? And do you show that in your pieces that you create?
I love that this is a dance podcast because I'm usually talking to the other side. I'm usually talking to either clinical groups or art and health groups or veterans groups, and I'm having to explain that transition from ballet to dance and how we get our military members and veteran members and military community members dancing and moving. And so I tell them, dance in the military is not that different. In both worlds, you learn choreographed movement, you rehearse choreographed movement, and then in both worlds, you might have the opportunity to perform that choreographed movement in a theater. In the military, it's just a theater of war. You're relying on your basic training. You're relying on those basic movements that you learned, and you're putting them to use, just like dance. Just like dance, you're not totally relying on them. There's some creativity, there's some improvisation, depending on the situation. So these worlds are really, really closely aligned. Further,
Well, it's humanity. Don't you think it's
yeah,
humanity too? Like
yeah,
it's the human, it's connecting human beings together.
yeah.
And that's what we're doing. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Continue.
No, I mean,
I
and then
got passionate.
when you flip the script, when we've been working in this space, I think one of the benefits we have is bringing all the things we're learning from doing this work back to the art community and saying, this is the evidence we found that the arts does this. Because as you know, evidence of impact of the arts is it's gaining popularity, but it's not where it should be for a lot of the other disciplines. And so one of the things we've been doing is, as you mentioned, I'm doing my PhD, is trying to find both programs and practices that build a robust program that is built so that our participants are creative, they're developing community, but they're also supported, their well-being and safeguarding is supported, and they're getting something beneficial out of it. As well, looking at it from the holistic health point of view, like what this is doing both to the individual participant who engages in this work and the audience member that sees it. We facilitate that in a couple of ways. We've had several VA physicians tell us that the same neurotransmitters in the brain that fire when you are actually moving, those same neurotransmitters fire when you're sitting watching a dance piece. So audience members are literally in their brains moving with the dancers.
Yes, I believe that 1000%. Yes.
Further,
I love that.
one of the things that's brilliant about military training is the way that a body and a mind is transformed in the experience. So the military pairs repetitive movements with vocal emphasis, as well as embodiment of what a person is doing in order to keep things going. So if you imagine somebody taking a punch, and your husband will love this part, in the Marine Corps, we are taught the movement, right? Just like we're taught in ballet, like you're taught to clench your fist, put your hip and the weight of your body into the punch, extend the arm, and do the punch. But then to emphasize it even more, you're supposed to yell Marine Corps when you make contact with whatever you're making contact with. So you're punching and you're yelling Marine Corps. And then there's a person that you're imagining is the enemy. So imagination, movement, voice, right? It creates this, it breaks down what an individual knows and it lays on top of that this way of being. So that as a military member, when you're given the instruction to hurt someone or you're given the instructions to take a life, you override the basic human condition of not wanting to do that so that you can be able to do it because it's what the military needs, right? So when we get out of the military, how do we undo that? Well, we're approaching it that you undo that the same way you had it done to you. We use imagination, we use embodiment, and we use sound as a way to break that down, layer on top of it, or to show a person a different way of being than the military. Because they don't need it anymore. They're in civilian life. They need to, like I did, they needed to learn how to reconnect with others. They needed to learn
cutting
how
that
to...
wire. It's like cutting it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. That is that's really fascinating because, you have to get wired a certain way and then you have to undo that so that you can take a deep breath again, right? Because, and I hate to say this, but this is the reality of when you're training in the military, and somebody said this, I can't remember which, I think it was a gentleman on your, on one of the things I watched, was that you're in the military and you're training to learn how to kill somebody. And I remember the first time I realized that when my father, was in the Navy. Now, my father went into the Navy and he served at the end of World War II. So he never saw active battle. And my husband didn't see active battle, so I'm very grateful for that. But when I realized that the two of them learned that, I was like, it's shocking to me. I can only imagine how shocking it can be to a military, individual when they now have to lead a civilian life and they have to not be on the constant, you're, I don't know if it's tension, but you're constantly looking on the defensive, I guess, to make sure that you are constantly knowing what's going on around you at all times. And so that's such a powerful thing that you're doing to undo that wiring so that veterans can live beautifully. If you're learning how to do something that is against our human condition, you need to give yourself something beautiful to remember what the human condition is about. And it's, for me, I believe it's about beauty, and art is about beauty. And so that you're putting the two of them together, well done and bravo to you. I'm going to give you the Congressional Medal of Honor.
I will
No,
give it to the company because they help us do the
really
work.
though, really, you're doing your service to the military and humanity is going beyond your military service. And I don't say that lightly, and I imagine you don't take it lightly, but thank you, because your service continues. So yeah, tell me more. Tell me more.
It's something I got really passionate about because I saw the impacts of war on those around me, as well as my loved ones telling me that I had changed. And
Really?
so since then, I've been on this search of like, how do we do exactly what you're talking about? How do we get those individuals to appreciate beauty and love and connection and community again, and fight against that, that everyday need to be isolated and quiet because nobody understands, and to take that being that we had been creating during our whole military service and suppress that and live in life. And that whole way of being, the military way of being, has cost a toll, not just in war but post-war. And so for me, my personal mission, my personal vision is to make those people enjoy life again and to see tomorrow, to see possibility in tomorrow, and then see possibility past tomorrow. We call that hope. How amazing is it when somebody comes to one of our workshops, right? And they're a military veteran. They're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. You're going to make me move. And somehow we get them moving, right? And I play that down, but we have a very intricate workshop process that we know exactly what gets them moving. And so it's scaffolded. So we introduce them to movement. We get them comfortable moving. We get them comfortable sharing moving. We get them comfortable creating their own movement, and it builds and builds. Once they've done all of that and they stand up on stage and they perform their work and they give their hearts to the audience, the most wonderful thing is when they turn around and they say, I just did that. I wonder what else I can do.
Wow.
And that's what we want. That's the belief that they can do something more.
Yeah.
And it's the belief that they can rely on the people around them to help them get there. And what more could we ask for?
Yeah. I mean, just amazing. Do you feel, you said when you came back, your loved ones around you were telling you that you had changed. Do you feel that you've now reclaimed your former self and in a better way? Like, do you feel that you can, you have more peace about you, and you have that openness and that gentleness, and because I tell you, I don't think if people knew that my husband was in the Marines that they would even know that about him, because he's one of the kindest, gentlest souls around. Like, I don't think you would know it about him.
I was laughing because my wife has a phrase that she uses when I do something odd. She says, "Je suis artiste." Um, when when I got the Fulbright to go and study in the UK and to create some more work and investigate my choreographic practice, um, I also committed to stepping away from the marine identity and stepping into the artist identity.
Mhm,
And so, I do weird stuff like, buy colorful scarves that I can put on my suit so that, or
mhm.
colorful jackets. And um, it's just a different way of being. But I think the answer to your question is yes. And I think it's art and, right? I think art
Mhm.
helped me get there, but I think my wife and my loved ones,
Yes.
their help along the way. And
Yeah.
then oddly, my wife and I had a Siamese cat named Serafina that I got when I departed the military. And that little cat unfortunately passed in October, but
Oh,
she was a very big part of our lives. And she was a very big part of showing me care,
yeah.
gentleness, and sacrifice again for something that
Yeah.
wasn't in uniform. Because
Yes.
when this little fur ball that can't communicate with you, but does nothing but want to play and love, and doesn't matter how your day was, doesn't
Yeah.
matter what anxieties or anger you might be holding, you still needed to be receptive and open and
Yeah.
give that cat a little pat on the head. And, yeah.
Yeah, and that's I think that that brings up another point too, which I think is so important. I'm a cat person too, so I'm so sorry that you lost your cat because my cat's 16 now and she's
Oh goodness.
old. Yeah, but so I know, I know. But I think that that speaks to what we're called to do as human beings and serve, like give
Yeah.
of ourselves to something other than ourselves when the
Yeah.
focus is so much on ourselves. And it doesn't mean you don't spend the time healing and doing all that. I don't mean that. I mean, like, we can't, if we only turn inward all the time, and I don't mean turn inward to know yourself and to learn
Yeah.
about yourself. And I mean, if it's all about me, there's no room for anybody else there. and
Yeah.
and when the minute you start to volunteer somewhere or take care of something else. Those who have children, they can't focus on themselves because they have to tend to the child first. An animal, you have to think about somebody else or some living being other than yourself, and you love them and they love you back unconditionally. I think that's what's so beautiful about it. And I just know it's so important that we offer service in some capacity. And that's why I love that more and more art organizations are doing that. Like they're offering going out into the community. That's a part of their mission is to do something within the community because it takes it out of just it's bigger than them. And I think it's really important that we remember that as part of the healing process and as part of the giving process because that's what we want to do in order to create beauty in the world. You have to give it away. You
Abs-
can't.
uh, Absolutely.
Right? Can't
I
keep it
think
for yourself.
I think you're touching on what I think of as an artist. Like when a person transitions from being, a technician or a student, learning a technique, perfecting a technique, learning choreography, perfecting choreography, and then what is that bridge that takes that and transforms that into the artist? And I think it's what you said. I think it's service. I think it's realizing that when you're on stage, you're doing a service to the audience and you're giving them of yourself. When you're a choreographer, when you're a community dance maker, when you're a painter, you're doing it for everybody else, and you get lost in the process. And that's for me, that's the most brilliant thing is when
Yeah.
Exit12 is bigger than me. When at our performances, our artists and our performers are bigger than me. And when suddenly, like, nobody's looking at my bio anymore, all they're looking at is when our next show is, who we're working with, and what we're doing in service of art and healing.
Yeah, beautiful. I think it's really I found it so fascinating, when I learned about you and the work you were doing. I just think it's, like I said, it's wonderful work. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like to say to the listeners or share with the listeners? Or do you have anything coming up, any projects that you're working, any performances or anything like that?
So we have 3 projects we're working on currently. We're working on a collaborative performance at the Citadel, which is a military college in South Carolina. We're working
Very
on a
nice.
project in Missoula, Montana, to work with veterans and the indigenous population that lives there. We're going to be back in New York City next May on the Intrepid with a new cohort of military veterans. If you want to check us out, if you want to see the documentary that we've been talking about, you can do that at exit12danceco.org. And before doing this podcast, I listened to tons of the other guests that Joanne has had on here on my morning runs. And so I beg, if you haven't listened to some of the other ones, go check them out. They're great.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for joining me, Roman, on Dance Talk with Joanne Carey. It's really been a delightful conversation. I could talk so much more about things. And I hope I'll get the opportunity to see the company perform. I really do. And especially, when you're at the White House. I don't know. Who's saying, who knows? Just putting it out there, putting it out there.
We'll put you on the invite list. And
There
thank
you
you
go.
for all that your husband has done and you supporting him.
Oh,
And give him a big Semper
yeah.
Fi from me.
I will. See, you did it to me. You gave me the goosebumps when you said it. I will tell him that. Thank you. And thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Dance Talk with Joanne Carey. Follow us, like us, and share, share, share. Thank you, everyone.
Powered by Riverside.